To conclusions.
Well, okay.
Some of the attitudes I'm getting from the family don't give me peace about their behavior.
Welcome back to my channel. A new home, a new beginning, a fresh start. At least, that's the story being sold to us on camera. Robyn Brown sits there, smiling softly, painting what looks like the perfect picture. She talks about this $2. 1 million Flagstaff property like it's more than just a house, it's a reset. A place closer to the girls' church, closer to college, a place where the future finally feels stable. And right beside her, Cody nods along, playing his role perfectly. Supportive. Agreeable. The devoted family man who just wants space for everyone to come together again. It sounds beautiful. It also sounds completely fictional. Because the moment you step away from the emotional narrative and actually look at the facts, everything starts to fall apart. Let's talk about reality. Since Sister Wives first aired back in 2009, Robyn Brown hasn't exactly been building roots, she's been moving. A lot. We're talking about 8, maybe even 9 relocations in just 15 years. Do the math. That's a brand new home roughly every 2 years, sometimes even faster. The only period that even looked like stability? Those Las Vegas homes between 2012 and 2018. And even then, the family was already fractured long before those houses ever went up for sale. So when Robyn looks into the camera and talks about a fresh start, you have to ask yourself, backhand index pointing height, which fresh start is she talking about? The St. George apartment? The first rental? The second? The third? Or is this just another chapter in a pattern we've seen over and over again? And here's where it gets even more interesting. Just recently, Robyn herself admitted something surprisingly honest. She said, wherever you go, you take your pain with you. You can't really start over. Think about that for a second. So now we have 2 completely different versions of Robyn. One who understands that changing locations doesn't fix emotional wounds. And another who's currently selling this mansion as if it's some magical reset button. So which one are we supposed to believe? Now let's look at the deal itself. Because before we even get into the house, there are already questions. They use the same realtor who sold their previous home to also represent them as buyers on this one. In real estate, that's called double dipping. Is it legal? Yes. But does it raise eyebrows? Absolutely. Because when one agent is making commission from both sides of the deal, you have to wonder, backhand index pointing right, whose interests were really being protected here. And then we get to the biggest red flag of all. The house itself. Built in 2002, and since then, it's changed hands 5, maybe 6 times. For a luxury property, that's not normal. High-end homes in places like Flagstaff don't usually bounce from owner to owner unless something is pushing people away. And it gets worse. The last few owners didn't even live there full time. They treated it like a vacation home. A rental. A temporary stop, not a forever home. So let's pause for a second and really think about this. Backhand index pointing right, a $2. 1 million property that nobody seems to want to stay in. Which leads to the real question. What exactly did Robyn and Cody just buy? Because behind that fresh start narrative, there might be a completely different story waiting to be uncovered. But here's where things start to take a very different turn. Because once you stop listening to the story and start digging into the details, this dream home begins to look a lot less perfect. Let's go deeper into the property itself. This house was built in 2002. On paper, it checks all the boxes, around 5,500 square feet, tucked away at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by that classic Arizona high desert beauty. From the street, it looks like the kind of place where you'd imagine raising a family, hosting holidays, building memories that last a lifetime. Exactly the kind of image Robyn keeps describing. But the history of this home tells a very different story. Because since its construction, it hasn't exactly been anyone's forever home. In fact, it's been passed from owner to owner multiple times 5, maybe even 6 different buyers in just over 2 decades. And that alone should raise a serious question. Backhand index pointing right, why does nobody stay? Luxury homes in desirable areas don't usually rotate owners like this. People who can afford properties at this level tend to settle in. They renovate, invest, and build long-term lives there. But this house? It's been treated like something temporary. The most recent owners before Cody and Robyn held on to it for just 4 years, and even then, they didn't live there full time. It was a second home, a getaway. And the owners before them? Same story. Going further back through the records, a pattern starts to emerge that's impossible to ignore. Backhand index pointing right, this property hasn't been a true primary residence for anyone in over a decade. It's been a rental, a vacation spot, a place people own, but don't actually want to live in permanently. And that detail changes everything. Because when multiple financially stable families choose not to make a house like this their main home, it usually means one thing: there's something about the property that doesn't work long term. Now here's another detail that might seem small, but it's actually very telling. When the house was first built, it had a light tan exterior. Neutral, clean, standard for the area. But at some point, that completely changed. The entire house was resided into a dark reddish-brown color, almost the exact shade of rust or dried clay. That's not a minor cosmetic update. That's a full transformation. And changes like that usually happen for a reason, not just style, but practicality. Because when homeowners start altering something that drastically, it often means they're trying to deal with a problem. Now at first glance, the location still seems perfect. Quiet, private, scenic. But if you take a closer look, if you zoom out and really examine the surrounding area, you start to notice something that doesn't quite fit. Something just beyond the backyard, past the edge of that peaceful cul-de-sac. Something industrial, something active. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because sitting less than a quarter mile away from this so-called forever home is a fully operational volcanic cinder mine. Not a historic site, not an abandoned operation. A working, active industrial zone running trucks, crushing rock, and operating like any other commercial business. And suddenly, everything about this house, the constant owner turnover, the short-term use, the lack of long-term residence, backhand index pointing right, starts to make a whole lot more sense. Because this isn't just a beautiful mountain home. It's a property sitting right next to something that could completely change what it's actually like to live there. And the deeper you go into this, the more questions start to surface. And this is where the story stops being suspicious and starts becoming downright unbelievable. Because that industrial site sitting just behind the property, it's not harmless. It's known as Sheep Hill, an active volcanic cinder mine operating in the San Francisco volcanic field just outside Flagstaff. And this isn't some quiet, occasional operation. This is full-scale industrial activity. We're talking about heavy machinery, constant excavation, trucks hauling tons of material in and out, and most importantly, backhand index pointing right dust. A lot of it. Because when you're crushing volcanic rock, you're not just moving dirt around. You're releasing fine airborne particles, PM10 and PM2.5, the kind that don't just float away, they get inhaled. They travel deep into the lungs. They linger in the air. And over time, they can cause real damage. Now here's where things take a turn that's impossible to ignore. Think about everything Robyn and Cody have said in the past. These are the same people who enforced strict rules during the pandemic because of respiratory concerns. The same family that separated for months, limited contact, and justified it all with one major point: backhand index pointing right, health comes first. Robyn has openly talked about being prone to pneumonia. Solomon's history with RSV became a central reason for their caution. They built an entire lifestyle around avoiding risk to their lungs. That was the narrative. That was the priority. But now, they've purchased a multi-million-dollar home sitting within breathing distance of an active mining operation, one that produces airborne dust as part of its daily function. Let that sink in. The same person who couldn't risk family gatherings is now living where the air itself can carry irritants directly into her home. And this isn't speculation. Local reports, environmental records, and community complaints have documented issues in this area for years: dust accumulation, truck noise, air quality concerns. This is known information. Anyone doing even basic research before buying a $2.1 million property would have come across it. Which raises a serious question. Backhand index pointing right, did they not know, or did they ignore it? because either way, it doesn't add up. And here's another detail that suddenly starts to make a lot more sense. That exterior color change. Remember how the house used to be light tan and was later changed to a deep reddish brown? Take a look at the color of volcanic cinder dust. It's almost identical. So now you have to wonder, was that redesign really about style? Or was it about hiding something? Because homeowners living near this kind of operation often deal with a constant layer of fine red dust settling on everything: cars, windows, outdoor furniture, even exterior walls. A lighter colored house would show it instantly. A darker one? Not so much. And suddenly, that design choice doesn't feel like a coincidence anymore. It feels like a solution. A workaround for a problem that never really goes away. And if that's the case, then this house isn't just a beautiful property with a strange history. Backhand index pointing right, it's a property with a built-in environmental reality, one that every previous owner eventually decided they didn't want to live with. So the real question becomes, how long before Robyn and Cody reach that same conclusion? Because if history tells us anything, this forever home might already be on borrowed time. And now, we get to the part that makes this entire situation impossible to ignore. Because this isn't just about a house anymore. This is about health, risk, and a level of contradiction that's honestly hard to explain. Let's talk about what living near a cinder mine actually means. When volcanic rock is crushed and processed, it releases microscopic particles into the air, fine dust, that includes PM10 and PM2.5. These aren't just harmless specks you can brush off your clothes. These particles are small enough to be inhaled deep into your lungs. And once they're in there, they don't just disappear. They can irritate airways, trigger inflammation, and over time, contribute to serious respiratory issues, chronic coughing, asthma flare-ups, even long-term conditions like reduced lung function. Now think about who is most vulnerable to this kind of exposure. Backhand index pointing right children. Backhand index pointing right people with respiratory conditions. Backhand index pointing right anyone with a history of lung sensitivity. Sound familiar? Because those are the exact same concerns Robyn and Cody used to justify their strict lifestyle choices in the past. They emphasized safety. They prioritized health. They built boundaries around protecting their family from airborne risks. And yet, now they're living in an environment where those exact risks are part of daily life. It doesn't stop there. The location of the house makes the situation even more concerning. The prevailing winds in that area? They blow directly toward the residential zone right where the property sits. So this isn't a case of it's nearby but doesn't affect us. No backhand index pointing right, this is a situation where airborne particles can literally be carried toward the home on a regular basis. And even if windows are closed, that doesn't solve the problem. Because these fine particles can still enter through ventilation systems. HVAC units pull in outside air, meaning the dust doesn't just stay outside, it can circulate inside the home as well. That's why residents in similar areas often rely on high-efficiency air filters, frequent duct cleaning, and constant maintenance just to keep indoor air quality at a reasonable level. This isn't luxury living. This is damage control. And there have been reports, actual complaints from people in the area about dust buildup on surfaces, even around air vents. That means the particles aren't just nearby. Backhand index pointing right, they're getting inside. So let's put all of this into perspective. For years, we watched a family operate under strict rules, limiting contact, avoiding gatherings, emphasizing how dangerous airborne exposure could be for their health. The message was clear. Backhand index pointing right, we can't take risks with our lungs. But now, they've chosen to live in a location where exposure to airborne particles is not just possible, it's expected. And that's where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. Because you can't have it both ways. You can't spend years saying respiratory health is too fragile to risk, and then willingly move into an environment known for airborne irritants. So what does that mean? Either those concerns were never as serious as they were presented, or this decision represents a complete disregard for the very risks they once claimed to fear. And honestly, backhand index pointing right, neither explanation looks good, because one points to exaggeration, and the other points to negligence. Either way, the narrative doesn't hold up anymore. And once you see that, It changes how you look at everything else. And just when you think the contradictions couldn't get any worse, this is where Cody's story completely falls apart. Because now we're talking about something that's not emotional, not environmental. Backhand index pointing right, just simple math. Cody sits in front of the camera and confidently says this new house has space for everyone. That it's a place where his kids can come, where Truly will have her own room, where family connections can finally be rebuilt. It sounds heartfelt. It sounds like effort. It also doesn't make any sense. Because when you actually break down the layout of the house, the numbers don't add up. This property has 4 official bedrooms. Not 5. Not 6. 4. Now, let's count the people already living there. Backhand index pointing right Cody and Robyn, that's 1 bedroom. Backhand index pointing right Solomon, another bedroom. Backhand index pointing right Ariella, another. Backhand index pointing right Aurora and Brianna, 2 adult daughters who each need space. That's already 5 people, needing 5 rooms. But the house only has 4. So someone is already being pushed out of a proper bedroom setup, and that's before Truly even enters the conversation. Now, technically, there's an office space that could be used as a bedroom. But let's be real about what that actually means. This room is located right off the main living area, near the kitchen. It doesn't have the privacy of a true bedroom. It likely doesn't have a proper closet. And it sits in one of the busiest, noisiest parts of the house. Morning noise. Late night activity. Constant foot traffic. Backhand index pointing right, that's not a bedroom. That's a compromise. And even if you count it, you're still stretching the house beyond its intended capacity. Now let's talk about the so-called extra space. There's a detached guest house on the property. Sounds promising, right? Except it's small. 1 bedroom, minimal living area, compact kitchen. And based on everything we know, backhand index pointing right, that space is almost certainly meant for Dayton. A private setup for a 25-year-old adult son, while Cody is on camera claiming there's room for Truly somewhere in this arrangement. So let's recap. 4 bedrooms in the main house. 1 makeshift office being used as a 5th. A detached unit likely reserved for Dayton. And somehow, backhand index pointing right, this equals room for Truly? It doesn't. Not even close. And here's where it gets even more revealing. The house they just sold? It had more bedrooms than this one. Let that sink in. They moved into a larger, more expensive property. Backhand index pointing right, but with less actual sleeping space. So this wasn't about creating more room for family. It was about something else entirely. Because if the real goal was to accommodate more children, to rebuild connections, to invite people back into the family, you would prioritize bedroom count. You would make sure there's space for everyone. But that didn't happen. Instead, the design of this house focuses on something very different. Large living areas. Open spaces. Visual impact. Backhand index pointing right, it's built for appearances, not functionality. And that makes one thing painfully clear. That statement about Truly, that promise of space for her, it wasn't based on reality. It was said for the cameras. A storyline. A performance. Because the floor plan doesn't lie. And in this case, backhand index pointing right, the house exposes the truth that the words are trying to hide. And this is where everything becomes impossible to defend. Because now, we're not just talking about space. We're talking about who gets that space and who never did. Take a look at the ages. Aurora is in her early 20s. Brianna? Also in her 20s. Dayton? Mid-20s. These are fully grown adults. Now compare that to how Cody treated his other sons, Gabe and Garrison, when they were at the exact same stage in life. Because the message back then was very clear. Backhand index pointing right, you need to move out. Backhand index pointing right, you need to become independent. Backhand index pointing right, you can't keep relying on the family. There was pressure. There was tension. There were expectations to leave. But now, the rules have completely changed. Because for Robyn's children, backhand index pointing right, independence is no longer the priority. Instead, a $2, 1 million home is being structured in a way that allows them to stay indefinitely. They get bedrooms in the main house. Dayton gets a private, detached living space, basically his own apartment. And the entire property? It's designed around keeping them comfortable, keeping them close, making sure they never have to leave unless they want to. And that's where the double standard becomes undeniable. Because it's not subtle anymore. Backhand index pointing right, it's built into the architecture. The same father who pushed some of his children toward independence is now investing millions to make sure others don't have to experience that same pressure. And if you've been watching this story unfold over the years, you already know what that means. This isn't about fairness. This isn't about equal treatment. Backhand index pointing right, this is about priorities. And those priorities are crystal clear. Now, let's go back to Truly for a moment. Because her situation makes this even more uncomfortable. Cody sits there, talking about creating space for her, making it sound like she's part of the plan, like this home includes her in some meaningful way. But the reality? Backhand index pointing right, she doesn't live there. Backhand index pointing right, she doesn't visit regularly. Backhand index pointing right, and there isn't even a proper room for her if she did. So why say it? Why create that narrative? Because it sounds good. Because it paints a picture of a father who's trying. A father who's making room. A father who hasn't given up. But the house tells a different story. The layout shows exactly who this home was designed for and who it wasn't. Robyn's children are fully accounted for. Their comfort is prioritized. Their future in this home is secure. Everyone else? They get words. They get promises. They get camera-ready moments that don't hold up when you look at the facts. And once you see that, backhand index pointing right, it's hard to unsee it. Because this isn't just about one house. It's about a pattern. A pattern of who gets support and who gets pushed away. A pattern of who is protected and who is expected to figure things out on their own. And this house? It might be the clearest example of that pattern yet. And now, when you step back and look at everything together, the house, the health risks, the bedroom math, the favoritism, backhand index pointing right, a very clear picture starts to form. Because this purchase? It's not just a home. It's a statement. A statement about who matters and who doesn't. Let's break it down one last time. Robyn's adult children, fully grown, in their 20s, are living in a multi-million-dollar property designed to keep them comfortable long-term. They have space. They have security. They have a father figure who is making major financial decisions with their needs at the center. Meanwhile, Cody's other children? They were pushed toward independence at the same age. Expected to leave. Expected to figure things out without the same level of support. That difference isn't small. Backhand index pointing right, it's massive. And it's no longer something you can explain away. Because now, it's visible in something concrete. The house itself. Then there's Truly. The emotional centerpiece of Cody's narrative. The child he claims this home includes. The one he says he's making space for. But when you strip away the words and look at the reality, backhand index pointing right, there is no space for her. Not physically. Not practically. And arguably not even intentionally. Because if she truly mattered in this decision, this house would have been chosen differently. More bedrooms. More functional space. A layout that actually supports visits and connection. But that didn't happen. Instead, we got a performance. A carefully delivered line for the cameras about having a room for Truly that completely falls apart the moment you look at the floor plan. And that brings us to the bigger issue. Backhand index pointing right, this isn't just misleading. It's calculated. Because statements like that don't just shape how viewers see him. They shape public perception. They shape narratives. Possibly even legal perspectives. It creates the image of a father who's trying, when the actions suggest something very different. And then, there's the environmental reality. The mine. The dust. The air quality concerns. All sitting right behind the so-called forever home. A family that once claimed extreme caution over respiratory health is now living in a place where airborne particles are part of daily life. And again, you can't ignore the contradiction. Because it forces one uncomfortable conclusion. Backhand index pointing right, either the past concerns were exaggerated, or this current decision is reckless. There's no version where both make sense. And that's why this house matters so much. Because it exposes everything at once. The inconsistencies. The priorities. The gap between what's said and what's actually done. This isn't just another move. This isn't just fresh start number 9. Backhand index pointing right, this is evidence. Evidence of a pattern that's been building for years. A pattern that fans have questioned, debated, even argued about. But now, it's all laid out in plain sight. In square footage. In bedroom counts. In location. And maybe that's why people are reacting so strongly. Because this time, backhand index pointing right, the truth isn't hidden behind emotions or edits. It's built right into the structure of the home. So the real question is, how long before this fresh start turns into another move, another reset, another story? Because if history has taught us anything, backhand index pointing right, this probably isn't the ending. It's just the next chapter. And at this point, the real story isn't what they told us. Backhand index pointing right, it's what they couldn't hide. Because no matter how carefully the narrative is presented, no matter how soft the tone, how emotional the delivery, how polished the image, facts don't change. The house doesn't change. The numbers don't change. And the contradictions? They're impossible to ignore. You have a $2. 1 million property being sold as a fresh start. Even though history shows a pattern of constant moving, you have a family that once built strict boundaries around respiratory health, now living next to an active source of airborne dust. You have a father claiming to create space for his daughter, in a house that physically doesn't have room for her. And you have adult children being fully accommodated, while others were pushed out at the exact same stage of life. Backhand index pointing right, that's not confusion. That's clarity. Because when you strip everything down, this isn't about a house. It's about choices. Who those choices benefit. Who they leave behind. And what they reveal when you look closely enough. And maybe that's why this situation is hitting people so hard. Because for years, viewers have watched this family and tried to make sense of it. Tried to believe the explanations. Tried to trust what was being said on camera. But now, backhand index pointing right, the gap between words and reality is too wide to ignore. This house didn't just give them a new address. It gave the audience something even more powerful, proof. Proof of patterns that were once debated, now confirmed. Proof of priorities that were once questioned, now visible. Proof that sometimes what people do speaks a lot louder than what they say. And the biggest question moving forward? It's not about this house. Backhand index pointing right, it's about what comes next. Because if this really is just another chapter in a long pattern, then we already know how it ends. Another move. Another fresh start. Another explanation that sounds good until you look a little closer. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think they'll actually stay in this house long term? Or is this just stop number 9 before number 10? And what stands out to you the most? Backhand index pointing right, the health contradiction? Backhand index pointing right, the missing room for truly? Backhand index pointing right, or the clear double standard between the kids? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you made it this far, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, backhand index pointing right, the next revelation in this story might be even bigger than this one. I'll see you in the next video. And now that we've gone through every detail, the bedrooms, the floor plan, the environmental hazards, the favoritism, and the contradictions, it's time to step back and see the bigger picture. This isn't just about a $2. 1 million house in Flagstaff. It's about patterns of behavior, choices, and priorities that have been playing out for over a decade on camera and behind the scenes. Look at the facts. Robyn's adult children get long-term stability and space designed for their comfort. Cody's other children were pushed toward independence at the same ages. Truly, the daughter he claims this house makes room for has no proper bedroom, doesn't live there, and rarely visits. The family moved into a home directly impacted by industrial dust, despite previously claiming extreme caution over respiratory health. Every single detail tells a story, and it's not the one presented on camera. What Robyn and Cody show the public is carefully curated. It's the family-friendly, new beginning narrative. But the floor plan, the property records, the environmental context, they tell a very different story. One about favoritism, performance, and contradiction. And that's why viewers are reacting so strongly. It's impossible to ignore when the numbers, the layout, and the reality collide with the story being told. Fans who have been following this family for years can now see exactly where priorities lie. It's spelled out in square footage, bedroom counts, and the very location of the property. Even the promises of a fresh start are questionable. Robyn herself has said multiple times that no matter where you move, you bring your pain with you. Yet here they are, acting like this Flagstaff mansion is the reset button that solves everything. History tells a different story: frequent moves, temporary ownership, and homes that never last as permanent residences. This house doesn't just reflect physical space. It reflects power dynamics, attention, and favoritism. It reflects which children receive investment and which ones are expected to adapt, compromise, or leave. And it reflects the gap between what is said for cameras and what is actually lived. So, what can we take away from all of this? White heavy checkmark first, never take the camera narrative at face value. White heavy checkmark second, documented facts, floor plans, property records, environmental reports, don't lie. White heavy checkmark third, patterns of behavior repeat, and this house may only be the latest chapter, not the final resolution. For longtime fans, this is a case study in transparency versus performance. The contradictions, the double standards, and the reality behind fresh starts are all visible now, clearer than ever. Now, I want to hear from you. Which part of this story shocks you the most? Is it the environmental health risks? The bedroom math that exposes Cody's claims about Truly? Or the long-term favoritism toward Robyn's adult children? Comment below with your thoughts. I read every single response, and your perspective matters. And if you haven't already, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications because the next revelation in the Sister Wives saga is already coming, and trust me, it's going to be even more jaw-dropping than this one. The $2.1 million home wasn't just a purchase, it was a lens. A lens showing exactly whose needs matter, whose voices are heard, and whose story is being told. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more revelations, contradictions, and drama in the world of the Browns.